right before we went to record the album, we were planning to cover Just Like Heaven by The Cure, and we had been rehearsing it. It actually sounded amazing, and the verses were totally true to the original, and there was singing, and it was really mellow, and then the chorus was really heavy version of the same thing with like gang vocals, and it was awesome. And I don't remember, but I think Jesse decided at the last minute that he didn't want to record it, and we didn't, but it was really awesome, and I wish people could have heard that. The very first show, I believe both the first two shows were in Indiana. The second one was like this festival type thing. The first one we just played in like this house, and we were on the floor, and I remember this totally metal looking dude in the front row with this with a Misfits shirt and hair down here, just like staring at us like this. He was kind of into it, and the show was so exciting. I mean, there was like probably 90 people there at the most, and I remember, playing with Jesse on drums was always a mystery, because you never know what he would do, because he would always change the drum beats completely, and that was his strength, and that was also his weakness. He wasn't consistent, but that was the excitement. That was a lot of times the excitement, and Russ and I were almost more of the rhythm of the band, as weird as that may be, because we always kind of tried to play tight together and play the same thing. And I remember that was the first time that I truly noticed Jesse's just gonna play what he plays and do whatever he wants to do. And as far as a person is concerned, Dan's just fun to be around. Dan's just a guy that you want to hang out with, and he's funny, he's very personable, he always has good stories to tell, and he's just a sweetheart. As far as being in a band with him, I always admired Dan's passion for writing lyrics. Dan always, you just knew that he put 100% of his heart into what he was writing, and it was, I remember he would read me things or go deep into stories about what this lyric means or where he got this from or these other things he had, and it's like, Dan is one of the best lyricists in hardcore, if not the best, and I just think that he just has a really creative mind, and he can just write about the craziest, weirdest thing, and sometimes you'll be like, Dan, where did that come from? Where did you get that from? And I don't know, it's just really the way he thinks about things, the way he can write them down. It's really inspiring. Well, Russ is another one of those people that you just can't say anything bad about, because Russ has always just been a sweetheart, and Russ has always been, he just has a good heart. Russ would never want to hurt anybody. He doesn't really have a mean bone in his body. I think maybe he tries to get mad sometimes or whatever, but Russ really, I don't think he can, and he's just a great guy to be around. He was also made, really fun and made the band really fun. As far as musically, Russ is really creative on guitar. He, at this point, has influenced a lot of guitar players. I couldn't have been more pleased that ZAO picked Scott to take my place, because obviously Scott was at least 10 times better than I ever was on guitar. Scott was just stupid fly. Scott was always an awesome player, somebody that I grew up playing in bands with. My old bands always played shows with his old band. I remember, Chad was in homeroom with him, and Scott, Creation is Crucifixion. Scott was like, me and Russ used to be like, I can't believe Scott Mellinger, I can't believe he can play that fast, I can't believe he can write those riffs and do that stuff. And so I was like, if they'd have got somebody worse than me, I'd have been bummed. But getting somebody as good as Scott, and Scott, who ended up going on to basically, to lead the band and to keep the band going at times when the band could have broken up. Scott was the force that kept it together through however many last years. So there's no way was there any better person for the job.
Christian bands back then, in the mid-90s, I mean, nobody paid attention to us whatsoever. We didn't get on tours. We had to book our own tours. We couldn't get agents. We couldn't get managers. Labels ignored us pretty much. That's how Solid State was able to make a name for themselves, because they went after bands and created this whole other market of bands that people were ignoring, and there were good bands at the time. It's just nobody was paying attention to them, and it was tough. The only bands that we could tour with, or it made sense for Living Sacrifice to tour with, were bands like Machine Head and Sepultura, and they just we couldn't get on those kind of tours. So it was a lot rougher. The venues were hard to get into because we couldn't get the right agent to book us in there, and so we were booking a lot of our own tours, booking lame venues like VFW halls and high school gyms, and but towards the end, like toward 90, 98, 99, kids were coming out, and everything started to change, and booking agents started paying attention, and we were able to get into decent clubs and get on better tours, and book ourselves with just regular general market bands. His influences were obvious, like At the Gates, Carcass, all very metal band influences, and that was real different than a lot of the hardcore that was out already. Most of the hardcore bands were in the all very similar, in the same vein of just yelling, the kind of the strong arm, not strong arm, but Stretch Armstrong style of hardcore vocals. And Dan was from a school of metal, and that was all different, and that's what was great about it. And definitely he had a lot of copycats. We delivered the record to Tooth and Nail. I think they were taken back a bit because they maybe weren't really used to metal records that were that extreme. I mean, up until that point, they were putting out, everything was hardcore, and the heaviest thing I guess they had was the Reborn album, Living Sacrifice. But that was similar to Living Sacrifice was similar to a lot of other types of bands that were out there. But ZAO's style was a blend of American hardcore and European metal type vocals, a la Carcass and At the Gates and everything. And I just think that was just something that was different for them. They weren't used to that and really didn't know how to react to it. Brandon seemed to love it, and Brandon he knew I think he knew that it was really, really good. But at the time, not quite sure probably whether or not Christian kids would get it. And in fact, what happened is that non-Christian kids got it, and that was cool because ZAO opened up a lot of doors and made a great crossover in that sense.
We're here in front of Mr. Toad's Pub, our local watering hole, and we were young men. We went to coffee shops and whatnot, and then when we became old enough and had the desire to do so, we began coming here, and this is still ZAO's favorite local bar. That's about it.
Mr. Toad's is a wonderful place inside. It's a tavernish, wooden, kind of rustic atmosphere inside. We can't actually let you see inside because it's closed. It's Memorial Day, so this is all you get to see.
All right, this is probably still one of the unchanged parts. It's not part of the mall necessarily, but part of the background of the mall. I believe some of the first actual shots from the roof are taken out over here, and down over here is where the first group of zombies start coming in. It's also where they kept and parked a lot of the trucks in the movie, the whole tractor trailer scene, and it was all filmed over in this corner here. Sorry, there's security coming. They're probably gonna yell at me. All right, sounds good. All right. All right, yeah, or just like a college.
I'm on vacation.
Yeah, but yeah, this is where it all went down. Now we're probably not gonna get in the mall for sure.
Yeah.
There was no security guards in the original though. I think they were all dead.
I think they were all zombies.
Which sometimes that isn't a bad thing, huh? But yeah, this is a historic ground that we stand on for anyone that is a fan of the zombie genre, would be my statement of the parking lot.
It's definitely a historic ground that's being defiled right now by this guy.
But yeah, and
He's calling it in.
yeah.
Well, I guess that's our cue to leave.
All right. That's where I work now, Unique Ink. Got my name on the window, coming up in life here. Guy Nick Cristofano opened this a while back, good custom artist. Glad to be up here. Work pretty much the same hours and do the same stuff I did at Animus, but working here gives me an opportunity to tour and not have as much to worry about when I'm on the road. But other guy, the Piercer Joe, worked with him at Animus for a long time. He works up here, and it's a good time. I enjoy working here more than anywhere I've ever worked. And it's definitely a positive, creative environment for tattooing. Clean and just a good time. But I think it's starting to rain, so.
Blame it on the rain.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure it out.
I actually do want to do a little more with you.
Okay.
Did you see that magazine at all?
Yeah, I saw it yesterday when Scott were looking at it in town. The only thing that bummed me out about it is they didn't mention that you're actually a tattoo artist.
You know what, that girl, if I would have been able, I was moving shops at the time, and if,
Anybody, no one else in ZAO has any tattoos at all.
I try to get enough for everybody.
Here, if you want to do a close-up on my earring.
I remember the first time I saw that.
Yeah, the right arm, those are the ones for Marty. The left arm, those are the ones for Scott.
They were literally one of the bands that kind of that whole metalcore genre, I think they were at the forefront of it, and then it seemed like a lot of bands caught up with what they were doing. I think they were always, it seemed to be like a bigger band for their time, and it seemed like later on the other bands kind of caught up to what they were doing, and then like a lot of bands that pioneer a genre or start it, you know, or are influential in starting it, I think people tend to forget about those earlier bands who start things off, and you pay attention to what's hot right now. And what's cool, we got to play with them in Florida a couple months back in May, and to watch kids, younger kids, I think, rediscover that band, which was a cool thing to do, or a cool thing to watch happen.
When I left the band, I never thought Jesse would actually be able to put it back together because it was just, there was something special about the lineup of us four, you know, Mick, Roy, Jesse, and I. There was just something special there, and I didn't know if Jesse could re-establish that and make it better. And so when I heard of the members that he was putting in the band after we were leaving, Brad and Russ and Dan, I knew all those guys because we played with their bands, Pensive and I can't remember the other band, but I know Pensive was one of the more significant ones, with Brett being one of the main focuses in that band. So I knew music, talent-wise, those guys had it. You know, I knew that they could do it, but I didn't know if it would have the same feel and the same emotion and the same feeling that we encompassed. So when he put it together, I had high hopes for it, but I just didn't think he'd be able to pull it off. And I remember I knew that they were going to be in town in Parkersburg playing a show with the Juliana Theory, and that was Brett's new band. So I remember they were going to play a show, and so I wanted to go to it, and I went there, and my jaw just dropped when they played. It was aggressive, and Jesse's drumming was just unbelievable that night. And I just remember they went crazy. I mean, they went nuts on stage, and the music was just so much more aggressive and so much heavier, and they were doing drop C tuning, which I'd never even heard of before that moment. And I just remember it was just so heavy and so brutal. And then they weren't really doing much of the songs that we wrote on the first album or our first two albums. So they were doing all Blood and Fire stuff. So it was just brutal. But I remember after that, a few months went by, and then the album came out, and I hadn't listened to it yet because I was kind of jealous, to be honest, after hearing them live. So when I actually got to hear the actual album, and they played, or I heard the actual album, I could not believe how good it was. I was so jealous. I was like, man, I got a better recording. They got a better studio. They got, it just sounds so much heavier. I was jealous, and actually kind of inspired me to later on down the road start my own new band just so I could do something just as heavy as that. It was unbelievable. They were definitely cutting edge at the time. In my newer band that I actually started, Symphony Apparel, we played a show with the new lineup of ZAO. We played a show out in Minnesota, and I remember it was really funny. We were joking the whole way there. We're like, wow, we're playing with ZAO, and everyone was asking me, how are you going to feel when you see those guys? And I honestly, I did not know. I didn't know how I would feel when I'd see Dan and the new lineup, because actually Jesse wasn't even in the band anymore. And because of him not being in the band, it was going to be a little weird. So the only person I really knew was like Russ and Dan, and a couple others I knew kind of well, but they were all new to me. But when I seen them, the one thing I noticed was they had their energy back, they had their love of the music back, and their music was definitely moving in a good direction again. So it was exciting to see that a band that I had basically helped start and helped, solidify the foundation of was still moving, was still going, was still strong. They still had a positive message behind it, and they were still going, and it was exciting to see, but yet again it was kind of disheartening to see, because you put so much work in it and then you see it change and then remold and then see all these new members, and sometimes you wish that it would die, and then other times you wish that they would carry on. I guess there's just different emotions involved when you're basically seeing your baby something that you helped raise grow up.
I was obviously into Carcass and At the Gates and stuff like that, and just like totally latched onto those vocals. Like the first time I heard Dan's voice, it was just like, now that's awesome, because it was just like not the hardcore tough guy thing. It was just metal, It's just.
And they showed up and they were like rockabilly guys, and
yeah,
it's like everything about it was just like, what is this?
Yeah, they were definitely.
Looked like Unbroken, sounded like Carcass.
Right, they were definitely on the forefront of like the whole of the scene, Even if people who might not have listened to them maybe would disagree with that, it's like, you gotta go back and ask some of those guys, of those bands that you loved, like if they listened to ZAO, if ZAO was an influence, and like they'd probably tell you yes, because that they definitely like set the stage for a lot of bands we hear about today. I mean, there's bands that are named after them and their songs, and there's bands that are obvious rip-offs of them, vocally and musically and everything. So it's pretty obvious to see like the kind of wake that they've left.
I think we got really excited because we've got these journals at Big Lots for like 99 cents. We got all excited about journaling, and I got like maybe 5 pages into my journal and it just kind of dissolved.
Yeah, I still have a lot of mine. I actually kept pretty thorough journals. I know I've got from different years.
Let's go ahead and just like randomly open one up and let's just read what's inside. From 97.
From 97.
This one's probably 97 because these were the journals, because I had one like this.
Yep, look at that. Well, this one's filled up too. No, I lied.
Yeah, that's about as far as I got.
All right, so let's just pick a page, read it. Don't even read it first. Just randomly pick a page and read out loud.
Okay. We spent the last weeks or so sweating over our 1975 Ford Econoline
It was some guy's hunting van. You could imagine the condition it was in. We fixed it all up and cleaned the insides. We took the time to build a loft in the back to sleep in and bought a canvas baggage rack for the top. Today is 5 days before we leave. It's noon right now and we're almost in Dayton. We're playing a big festival today. It's Kevin's first show. He's only been playing bass for 2 weeks. He's doing really well. Ron's a natural, and I'm very excited for Ron and Kevin and Crazy Pat to go out west. I bet there's some stuff in here from...
Oh, those were all the dates for our tour.
Yeah. I bet I have... some stuff from right before we left. And then during ZAO's performance, Eric wore a Monroe shirt to support us. So I kind of made a panorama here, but that had to have been right around the time when Eric was leaving and Sean was coming in.
That was his last show. It was in Marietta, Ohio.
That's the Marietta show, yeah.
Yeah, and you got shocked because we were on a brick concrete floor or something like that.
Yeah, that's
and it was
right.
wet.
We were excited because we had heard that the studio that we were recording these songs in was where the Deftones did their original, not necessarily their recorded Adrenaline and Around the Fur, but where they had done a lot of the original demos and, started, laying stuff down. So it was pretty exciting, and it was a really cool studio. It was pretty much a skate park / music studio. I remember we skated. There was the drums were done on a ditch ramp. There was a giant ramp, and they set up Jesse's drums on the flat section of it, and he did drums there. And while people were doing guitar and backup vocals and vocals, everyone else was skating outside. It was a really cool experience. Everything just from, that was when the Deftones had first really broke onto the scene with Around the Fur. And it was just really cool to be in the studio. And one of the first times I was ever in California, which being from Pittsburgh is a very interesting experience. I just think there's so much confusion about Christ and originally what he came to do. He came back and he came to all the churches and he was disgusted. I mean, if you read the New Testament, it begins more or less with Jesus being disgusted at the state of the church and where it had come to and what it had evolved to, because it had everything to do with money and, more or less political aspects than it did with anything about just believing in God and wanting to, know God or, reach out and in some way try to find God. It became more of a suit and tie, money type of thing, and that's what we started to realize. I mean, I just think that, and with putting out our music and Liberate, I think that one of the funny things is people talk about there's you're dealing with subjects of rape and murder and suicide and things like that, but what is the Bible about? You know what I mean? If you look back in it, there is, the Bible is not a bright, shiny book of happiness by any means. It's a real life, dark, it gets into people's personalities and everything from, you have a man named David who wrote the Psalms, which, are, sung in churches across the world. And he's also the man that had a woman's husband killed because he wanted to sleep with her. And, it talks about, David was a man after God's own heart. And to me, I started realizing that, the pursuit of God is not perfection necessarily. It's the pursuit of God. And it's someone trying to reach out and become closer, what they feel is their beginning and their, what they are made of. and, you know, understanding spirituality, but it's become more of a, you know, show up to church every week, have a nice suit, have a nice haircut if you have tattoos, whatever. It just makes me sick. You know, Jesus, you know, when he was here, he hung out with, you know, biblically in the New Testament, you know, the tax collectors were pretty much at the time, or had about the same social status as a garbage man, and, you know, the people, the fishermen and things like that. These were at the time, the technical blue collar, you know, workers of society, and everything from, you know, hookers, and, you know, like, you know, Christ came back. The church was in, you know, ruins. He had nothing but bad things to say about where the church was at. He embraced the lowest forms of society, everything from the hookers to the garbage men, you know, to people that'd be like, you know, I guess, you know, nowadays, like fast food employees. That's pretty much who the apostles were. And now these days, the people that are like that are the people that are kicked out and shunned from the church. And those are the people that, you know, they don't like the way they look, and they don't like the way they act, and they don't like the music they listen to. But if we look back and learn, those are the people that, you know, in the New Testament, Christ embraced and hung out with. And now, in, you know, the year, you know, 2000 or whatever, those are the people that are being kicked out of the churches on a daily basis because they won't clean up and buy a suit. And it's just like, you know, it's almost like if there was a New Testament, Christ would come back and he would tell the churches that today that have been established that they're doing the same exact thing that the churches were doing in the New Testament that he hated. And, you know, it just makes me sick because, once again, we've completely lost view of everything important. You know, people say, like, you know, you learn from your mistakes and history repeats itself. History does repeat itself. The Bible is repeating itself because we are in the same place that we were when the New Testament was written, in my opinion. We are in a place where, you know, politically and monetarily, those people are respected and looked at as, you know, perfect Christians, and the people that are, what, you know, that maybe have tattoos or piercings, that probably love God way more and have way more of a true compassion than these people are, you know, kicked out and shunned. And these other people, because they look the part, are progressing, and it's the same. History has repeated itself. We've learned nothing. And I always liked, you know, the saying history repeats itself, because it does over and over and over, and we never learn. But in the same time, I guess that's the beauty of humanity, you know, that, you know, in my opinion, the only way you learn is from personal experience. And no matter how many books you read and how many times, you know, someone tells you something, it never hits home until you experience it yourself. You know, like you have all these heroin addicts out there saying, heroin ruined my life. But no one ever realizes that until they become a heroin addict and ruin their life. And it just makes me sad, because there's so many awesome people out there that have been shoved under the carpet and either keep their beliefs to themselves or don't believe anymore, because the people that were supposedly the elite spiritually are, in my opinion, the least spiritual. And, you know, if anything, that's what this band's about. It's, and until the day I die, I will conflict with the church, because I do not believe it's in the proper place right now. And it bothers me, and you know, it truly, truly just bothers me, the state of where we're at now. And it's just the same as it was, you know, at 0, you know, AD. The same, exactly the same. It's corrupt, and it's, you know, all about status, and it has nothing to do with how spiritual you are or how much you love God. It has to do with your appearance and your profile. And your money. And money, you know, and your vote. And I don't think that will ever change, in my opinion. And I think part of the beauty of the Christian walk is they talk about, like, you know, it's an alone walk, and it's, you know, you're by yourself. Your Christian walk is a lonely walk, and it makes me feel better that even the people that are supposed to be my peers tell me that what I'm doing is wrong. And it's just the same as back then, you know, all the apostles in Christ, and, you know, everybody was telling they were blasphemers and wrong. And, you know, maybe you would think people in these positions today would realize this from reading the Bible, but they don't. You know, they're just like the Pharisees. And
one of the most memorable shows is actually still to this day the hottest show I've ever played in my entire life. It was in Pensacola, Florida. I believe actually Fort Walton Beach, Florida. We played with 238, and a place that held about 90 people, about 350 kids. It was 110 degrees outside, and inside, no exaggeration, had to be at least 130 degrees. I've never been as hot as I was that day in my life. I just remember Jesse got off stage and threw up twice because he was so hot. Russ and I couldn't fret our guitars at the end of the set because there was so much water and sweat all over us that just my fingers, I just remember them being completely pruned and we couldn't even play guitar. I remember Russ tripping on the stage because it was so soaked from sweat and condensation in the room. And I just remember kids jumping up on stage, and it was just crazy. There were just a lot of crazy shows.
I believe I was 19 or 20 at the time. And for me, it was amazing. I really, you know, didn't have many friends in high school, wasn't necessarily the most popular person or anything. And for me, all of a sudden, it's like feeling important for the first time in my life. And it was really strange. And I think maybe that's why a lot of it's blurry, because it was such an intense, it was just a really intense experience at the time. Not like to the point where it's not even real. Yeah. Almost kind of like when someone you care about passes away and you hear about it and it takes a month, you know, till you really sit back and realize that somebody's gone. It's kind of the same thing. It's all happening, but it's not real. You're not realizing any of the actual ramifications of the situation at the time. And, you know, you look back a couple years later, and it's just, that's, I think, when it hits you, you know?
Russ is, like, unbelievably, like, gifted. I don't know if anybody said that on this, but he's, like, one of those dudes you want to, like, hate because, like, he's good at everything he does. I mean, he's a ridiculous skateboarder. He can sit down at a piano. He's, like, awesome at guitar. He's as good of a drummer as me or the next guy. Like, he's so good, you know?
A lot of the early ZAO shows weren't tours. A lot of them were weekend dates, you know, where we wouldn't necessarily go on tour. We would go out for 3 or 4 days at a pop on a weekend, you know, driving anywhere from like Indianapolis to Connecticut to, you know, a lot of it, you know, within like, you know, 5 to 6 hours of where we lived. I even remember doing things where once we drove to Texas in Jesse's car in a Volkswagen. It was like 20 some hours, played a show and drove back 20 some hours. We did a lot of just, you know, weekend type of things.
Our singer definitely was the main driving point for anything talked about, political, you know, anti-religious, anything, any of that kind of stuff. He was the guy that would write the lyrics and was most passionate about that. And I was just, you know, I think 16 at the time and just stoked to be in a band playing.
Sean Jonas ZAO played with them. Scott had his little blonde bowl cut and his freaking gym coats on, and shred, dude. Just unbelievable. I mean, I just remember being like, God, I've never seen music like this. Incredible.
Before Russ was in my first band, this is when it was still this original guy, we had decided to go check out the other band who practiced in Fort Allen at Steve Peck's house. And so we're at practice one day, and we just put our instruments down and got in the cars and drove a couple of streets over to Steve Peck's house. And inside was Steve Peck on drums, met him that day, and Scott on guitar, and let me think. Their friend Dan Stout on bass and another guy on vocals. Actually, I think they had like 5 or 10 singers, something like that. They just changed singers every week. But yeah, that band was called Ragweed. So I met Scott and Steve at a ragweed practice. And when we walked in, they were covering Territorial Pissings by Nirvana. And the crazy thing about it was the last song that we had played at our practice before we put our instruments down and went over there was Territorial Pissings. So it was kind of like, you know, it was almost like surreal, you know, because none of us had ever, you know, they knew, like our drummer Mike Laughlin, who plays in he plays in Cattle Decapitation now. He actually, you know, knew those guys from school, but, you know, I had graduated a couple years before them, and so I was meeting them all for the first time, and it was just, I always thought it was crazy that we were both playing the same song at probably the same time, and, you know, that should have been some indication that we would, you know, be together, you know, 10, 12 years later doing this stuff.
And I mean, I've been to shows with ZAO where when Dan was speaking, it was absolute silence, and 500 people just standing in absolute silence as Dan's speaking, kind of mumbling his way through some of those songs, hating to be in front of the crowd, but doing such a good job, and just people crying, and just, it was intense. It was just an intense time for the band and for that period of hardcore, for sure.
My whole entire life, I'd wanted, you know, I loved, you know, film, the idea of, you know, just, I just love movies. Movies are my life. Both movies and music are my life.
I guess ZAO had to do what they had to do in order to make a living, in order to try to keep it going. But to me, my humble opinion is that ZAO can't be ZAO without Dan. And now I just think he's too much the identity of the band, and his lyrics and his voice are too. I mean, it's weird because, you know, what, 6, 7, however long ago, years ago, people could have said, there's no way you can have ZAO without Sean, and before that, you can't have ZAO without Eric. And I guess people have been proved wrong, but at this point in time, I don't think you can replace Dan, and hopefully that won't ever have to happen again.
Because if you talk to different bands, I remember talking to Ben when we did a Dillinger tour. They came up with the riff for 43% Burnt on the fly. Like, they were just sitting in the studio and he was like, and it just came to him. And I think that's the beautiful thing about music is, you know, sometimes if you work on songs, they can turn out to be, you know, Rain songs or, you know, something insane like Stairway to Heaven. Or if you do something really, really fast, they can turn into, you know, 5-year winners, something like it's almost just inspired that it wasn't, you didn't write this song, it kind of came from something higher than you because it just came through you or something.
When the point comes where I'm not involved in this band anymore, or when the band comes to an end, or we're just too old to do it, that I'll probably still be writing those things, but they'll probably never be used in, like, you know, musically in a band ever again, because I've fashioned that side of me, and that, like, you know, kind of like expressing, you know, sorrow, regret, anger, you know, all those things. Like, there's a certain part of me that I would never feel right writing anything like that for a band except for this band. And once this band, you know, however it comes to an end, you know, I'll probably, you know, never, you know, vocally do anything like that again with anything, which is a whole other strange thing in and of itself. You know, just that I was lucky enough to have this outlet. When Self-Titled came around, it's when a lot of us weren't necessarily as enveloped in the scene as we had been before. Not where we didn't enjoy what we were doing and didn't respect our fans, but it was like personally, our musical tastes had grown. I don't want to say fully, but, you know, a piece of each of us had grown more accustomed to certain types of music, and our influence definitely were changing. And it was just kind of like, you know, all this is changing and we're gonna do, you know, it was kind of like just thrown together. We're like, so if we're gonna throw it together, let's just have some fun with it, you know. And you know, I could say seriously at that time, since like probably around self-titled, like I really don't listen to that much, especially what's going on now, like heavier music at all. I still like a lot of the root music I grew up on, but besides that, mainly anything heavy I listen to anymore these days is all old. I just still listen to all old metal. Like to me, like that was like the pinnacle of that type of music, because there was nothing in it except for playing. Like there was really no money, there was really no recognition. You played that music because you loved it. And there was bands that progressed and rose to the top because they loved what they did. And you know, it's different now, even because even if you're like a mediocre band, you can still make a living doing this.
Self-Titled, I think, is still a great record. I think Self-Titled is still one of the defining records of ZAO. To me, the controversy that we heard most at the label about Self-Titled, and it's the one thing I told the band not to do, and that was the song where they mentioned a couple people that were talking crap on the band on the message board. Jesse had to do that. They wanted it to kind of speak out about it, and they did. And it didn't actually. It turned out okay. Kids didn't freak out too bad, and I think they survived with their integrity intact. And to me, Self-Titled, it was definitely it was the bridging over from the more hardcore realm to the heavier stuff. 5 Year Winter being again the song that many people relate to live, that respond to live. It's definitely, you know, a fast metal song. It's, you know.
Yeah, it was on my Pro Tool rig I bought off Aaron Sprinkle, and I erased it. You're welcome, Brendan. I would have never let that shit come out. It was garbage.
Wow.
So, you know, I was definitely always really concerned with the legacy of something I'd spent so much time on.
The last show that I'd played with ZAO before I went to film school was at a show in Pittsburgh at a venue called Laga. And it was a really crazy show. It was actually the only show my parents ever went to, so it meant a whole lot to me. There's a song on Self-Titled called Simeon Simmons. And actually, what that's derived from is a side project in which me, Dan, and Scott had actually we formed this band. I forget exactly what year, but it was just kind of like how all our side projects kind of form.
I would have to say that this collaboration was my favorite, my love, and will always be the best thing that I've ever done musically, period. Even though my singing might not be the greatest, I don't care. That band to me is my heart and my life and what I loved at the time, and all of us felt that way.
The early stages of Jade Meridian, we wanted to do another project like 8 Stars for Elijah.
It was just so awesome to be in a band with Russ again that was completely free of any kind of tension. It was like you walk into practice, everybody's smiling, and we knew that nothing was probably going to happen, but it didn't matter because we just loved doing it.
We had much more freedom than we ever did in the past, and that's why Jade Meridian was sort of our baby, the thing that we just took care of, that we loved, no matter what happened, no matter if people, if we didn't have any fans, or anything, of the sort. If we were the only ones that liked our music, it was solely because we love to get together, because music is our thing, and we love to do.
Anytime you start a new band, especially when you change the genre of music that you're known for, nobody's gonna be into it, especially when you're trying to bring it to the kids that know you for ZAO. I wasn't expecting people to be like, oh, awesome, they're not heavy anymore. Let's be into their band, you know what I mean? But that definitely was the best time I've ever had in a band, for sure, and probably will be the best time I've ever had.
So we walk away from it, and I move to Pennsylvania. I completely lose contact with everyone, like 100%. I think I talked to Dan like once, if not at all. Like he would have been the only person. During which time I become friends with Rob again from the breakdown of what had happened. And I'm living outside of Philly and was helping when I moved to Pennsylvania, I was helping my friend's band in the Underwater, the rock band that went on that last Burn It Down and Walk Away tour, and they had lost their drummer. So I'm helping them I quit their band. They all hate me because I quit. And majors were looking at us. We had a deal offered from Roadrunner, and no offense to them, now they're freaking great, but at the time it sounded like horrid Creed, and it just went against every single thing that I'm completely made of. I quit, lose all my friends. I'm in Pennsylvania by myself.
So, you know, we go through all this stuff, we get the contract signed, and, you know, I'm calling Barry Pointer, the guy that recorded our last couple records, to do this record, and all this stuff's starting to go. And then all of a sudden, you know, Barry kind of agrees to do the record, but not completely, and I kind of misinterpreted him when he didn't really come out and state that he wanted to do this record with us. And, you know, so time kind of, a month passed, and finally, you know, we're ready to get the budget, and we're ready to go to record, and I call Barry, and Barry's like, I never agreed to do the record. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You never agreed to do the record. I thought we did. And he's like, actually, no, I said I'd think about doing the record, but then you guys never called me again. And so, I mean, I can't do this record now. I have other stuff going on. And I'm like, oh, man, like this is a blow to the whole thing because we were getting ready to go record already. And so I called Patrick, and Patrick's freaking out. He's like, you know, whatever we have to do to get him to do the record, let's get him to do it. Let's just do whatever. So he's throwing out numbers again, like monetary numbers, to have Barry do the record. And so I call Barry, I'm like, this is what we can give you to do this record. It's going to be double what you're going to make with any of these other bands. So when Barry heard the numbers, he was way more interested, and we started talking more, and I told him how this recording process was going to be a lot different than the other ones. There wasn't going to be the fights that kind of were there. There wasn't going to be the tension of this guy wanting this and this guy wanting that, and Jesse getting upset because his drums would do this, or throwing sticks in his studio or whatever. And so Barry finally kind of decided, you know what, I'll do this record with you guys. Awesome.
The first record, when it first came out, this is the original All Else Failed, I think they pressed 1,000 copies of it. And then, you know, they sold those 1,000 copies, and then it was pretty much just, you know, put on hold. Our friend Matt Traxler owns the label that put it out, and, you know, lack of funds, lack of whatever, it didn't actually get repressed for a while. So it was just kind of, you know, stayed at a certain size, and then when they did Splinter Shards, they rehashed a couple of the songs from All Else Failed, and, you know, put some more on. And that record, I forget what the numbers are on that record, but it, you know, it didn't do, you know, as well, nearly as well as the later ZAO records. So the first incarnation of ZAO, you know, certainly never had the success of the ZAO once, you know, Brett and Dan and Russ got involved in it. So, you know, in that aspect, it's almost like, you know, there are two different ZAOs in my mind. And the old ZAO, you know, just due to the fact that not a lot of people have ever heard it, is just, you know, it is not held in as high of importance as the ZAO from Blood and Fire on.